We have a couple more questions from the audience, but I just want to remind the candidates, if they have a question they'd like to pose to all the candidates, please write it down. So the next question I have, which is from the audience here, is how can the legislature adapt to a post-COVID lower spending? And that question goes to Wendy
Excuse
first.
me, yep. That is a very good question, and it's going to be a challenge because there was a lot of funding, as I mentioned before, that came in from the federal government. One thing the legislature did with most of that funding, which I thought was really smart, is they made one-time expenses, which is exactly what you're supposed to do when you get one-time revenue, is you don't count on that revenue continuing. So they have planned for a post-COVID financial situation. In the pension example, they're looking at future revenues that would be generated anyway. The childcare is a good example. The legislature knows that we need more affordable childcare, and what they've done is commission a study that will be finished in December that will show where childcare should be, is the structure of childcare in the state government, who should monitor it, because that depends that impacts the regulation, and then also how it will be funded. So that's huge, because if we're going to fund it at the levels that folks want, which is having parents only have to pay a maximum of 10% of your salary, of your income rather, to childcare, that's a very generous level. And so the legislature needs to consider that, and they're ready to consider it. So I would say by and large, they did a great job of spending the money in a way that showed that they knew it wasn't recurring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nader.
Good question. So, you know, at the moment, the state of Vermont budget looks good, but that doesn't mean that things won't change. And, you know, if you go on the Joint Fiscal Office website, you can actually see their projections for what this year looks like, what the next year will look like. You know, I think it's out to 7 years or so. But, you know, of course, things change. And I think that the government's priority in order to better brace against future changes or recessions or depressions is to focus on building out basic infrastructure for people. And by basic infrastructure, I mean things like housing and making sure that people have access to food and clean water. And when we're able to provide people with their basic needs, there's a decrease in crime. There's also a decrease in having to use social benefits and different welfare programs. Our social benefits, that's the second highest expense that we have in this state. The first being the education fund, K through 12. So my focus would be on building out basic infrastructure and providing basic needs for folks.
Tim?
Thanks. I'm going to agree with Wendy there that you know, the influx of funds really have to be spent on capital expenses, not operating expenses, when you look at it from a municipal standpoint. The influx, you know, what I've been seeing as I'm traveling around to different towns is a lot of even very small towns have ARPA committees in their towns, and I really applaud that, because there is this decision to be made about how towns can spend their funds, and it really it saves on select board's burden of work if you can involve more of the community and people who have an interest. But the fact is that normal, you know, has to return to being absolutely careful with taxpayer funds. We can't go on like we're going to expect that this influx of cash is going to keep coming. An example of a problem that we definitely have to solve, I think, is we've really learned that universal school meals, as I mentioned before, is just so valuable to keep kids on that level playing field of having guaranteed breakfasts and lunches in schools. We really just have to figure out, how do we make that go forward without the influx of cash? We have to figure out how to budget that appropriately.
Thank you. Post-COVID lower spending, how in the world is that gonna happen? With a legislature that is not really handling its responsibility well. For instance, Beth Pierce, the treasurer, has an over-optimistic view of the investment growth and income, somewhere around 8 or 8.5%. She's done that each year, and the funds have never earned those kinds of returns. And the result is that all of the calculations the legislature does is based on over-optimism in terms of what the revenues will be. And so there's a real serious problem there. I think we have to deal with unfunded, some of this has been mentioned before, but I'll mention again, unfunded mandates, budget shortfalls have to be, we can't spend money we don't have. And I think that the ARPA funds that came in, a good portion of that should have gone to resolve the shortfall in the pensions. If you're a union member for the state of Vermont, then your pensions are underfunded. They have been for years. And this was an opportunity to use those one-time funds to make up the difference. And there was some efforts made in that direction, but nowhere near enough. You've got to pay the debts before you can buy something new. And so I would put that as a sort of a guideline for the state to follow in handling the lower spending. We have to live within our means. I mean, as a banker, you'd expect me to say that, and I do say that. I think that's important.
Thank you. Mark? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Post-COVID.
Post-COVID spending.
Post-COVID spending. Lord have mercy. People got no idea what's coming to you. Let's make more and more programs, throw more and more money at it. Hasn't worked for 50 years. It isn't gonna work now. You better start talking to some farmers that made it through the Depression. You look at Europe, their electric bills went up 1,000% in places in Europe. Post-COVID spending, people talking about the pensions. Last I recall, it was $9 billion unfunded pensions. Oh my God, they had a huge success. They put in 500 million and sent 650 million to the Ukraine. You know, Vermonters better buckle their belts because it's a hard ride coming. You're gonna lose your federal funding. Better start thinking about it.